I am your host, Nicole Will, and we're so happy you're here as we navigate the world with your aging loved one. We are here to come alongside older adults, family members, and the senior living community as we explore the world of aging and elder care with helpful resources, informative interviews, and approachable conversation. We get to do this together, so join us on our journey, and this is the willGather podcast. How do we effectively communicate with those that we love that have dementia? Is there a right way to respond or care for our loved ones? What does being dementia aware really mean? And how do I deal with all of the emotions that I'm feeling, the stress, the guilt, all of those things that come into play when we're caring for those that we love? Today, we learn how families and caregivers can have peace of mind and understand that there is a better way to communicate and improve the quality of our relationships. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Laura Wayman. She is an author, a caregiver, a coach, a family counselor, also known as the Dementia Whisperer. She is an internationally recognized dementia care expert, and her mission is to change the world in a way that memory care services are provided and to those that suffer with memory care impairments. Her innovative approach to caregiving has given her valuable insights on how caregivers can enhance and even enjoy their relationships with their loved ones. She is the author of A Loving Approach to Dementia Care, Making Meaningful Connections While Caregiving. We talk about her book today and the lessons learned. She is a sought-after speaker with extensive experience in sharing her knowledge with others about becoming dementia aware. And here is my interview with Laura Wayman. Thank you, Laura, so much for talking with me today. I have read your book and I just couldn't wait for our conversation. I think there's so much valuable information that families can pull out of those chapters and just take to heart all of the things that happen on this journey that we go through with our loved ones that have dementia. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicole. I'm so honored to be here with you and to share my message with all of your listening audience. It's just so exciting today.
It is. It's a good day. Well, I've just been counting down the days for a conversation and it's finally here. There's so much we can talk about. So I'll preface it by saying people really just have to read your book, which can you tell us exactly what the title of that is and what you do and just a little bit about your story so we can learn about you before we dive into all of the other things.
I would love to share that information. My book, A Loving Approach to Dementia Care, is published by Johns Hopkins University Press. And I, of course, was so excited when they looked at my work, and my mission is to raise the standard of care that we provide to anyone who has any cause of loss of brain function and dementia symptoms, to help people better understand a deeper understanding of what dementia is, how it actually affects that person, not just physically, but emotionally and socially, and just their whole world is changed and how they perceive the world and how that affects in such an extreme, how that affects the caregivers, that family caregivers. And of course, the heroes, the professional caregivers who are also supporting and providing care for that person who has any cause of dementia symptoms. So I became the Dementia Whisperer based on a story that is in my book. You read that story. And so if I have just a minute, can I share that story with the world? It's the chapter called The Ultimate Toll, about Peggy. So can I quickly share that story with everyone, Nicole?
Yes. I would love that. I would love that. Thank you.
So basically, Peggy was a wonderful mother of 5 and a grandmother and wife to her husband, Jack. And as she was raising her babies after Jack and Peggy had eloped, She found she was a true caregiver at heart. She loved raising babies, so she began to invite foster children into her home. And before it was all said and done, she not only raised her own 5 healthy children, she helped to raise over 20 foster children, and every one of those foster children had special care needs, and she would always step up to the challenge. After she had successfully raised all of these children and they became adults and started leaving the home, Jack and Peggy began to plan for their retirement dream lifestyle. And they had talked about always buying an RV and traveling all over the United States. And so when that opportunity came, when all the kids were out of the house and off to their own lives, that's exactly what they did. They had planned for this fun retirement. But unfortunately, Nicole, by then they were a little older and they were starting to be, especially Jack, was starting to be challenged by some physical challenges, some aging challenges. For example, he had macular degeneration. So most of the driving for their lovely home on wheels fell on Peggy, but she didn't mind that so much. As they were driving around enjoying this new lifestyle, she began to be concerned about the fact that he began to show signs and symptoms of dementia. Now, she had seen many of her friends and some family that were dealing with this, and so she knew it was difficult. But as Jack continued to decline and show more and more of these signs, Peggy decided that the life on the road was not going to be really suitable or appropriate to give him the care he needed as he continued to decline. She took him to their family physician, and they found that he had Alzheimer's as the cause of these dementia symptoms. Peggy knew that was kind of the line in the sand because there was no recovery, no treatment, and that she had to step back into the role of being a caregiver for her beloved spouse. Now, she did so, being that caregiver at heart, with great gusto. They sold their RV, they bought a little house. She stepped back into that role. They had friends nearby that also were in that later stages of life. But unfortunately, Jack continued to decline, and Peggy began to struggle caring for him on her own. It became quite demanding. But they had chosen a home far away from their family, so she couldn't ask them to help her. So unfortunately, she was really kind of isolated and on her own, but she decided she was going to call them on the phone and get some emotional support. So she began to talk about how difficult it was, that Jack was now wandering. She couldn't take her eyes off of him for a minute. She even had to call the police a couple times because he had been out the door and down the road, and she needed to ask for help from local first responders. He wasn't sleeping at night. She was exhausted because she was having to sleep with one eye open. He needed that constant supervision, and she was exhausted. And sometimes he didn't even process who she was any longer. And he'd become quite frightened, quite anxious, thinking she was a stranger in their own home. The family said, "Why don't you get some help in there?" And she said, "There's no dementia-aware trained people in this little town. There's no memory care or in-home care. There's no one to help me." So the family would say, "Well, we'll come help you." And she'd say, No. I'm a caregiver at heart. I'm not going to interfere with your life. I'll take care of Jack. You need to just take care of you and your new family, your career, education. So she would always refuse their help. Then one night, Jack and Peggy were home alone, Nicole, and Peggy had made this wonderful dinner for Jack. But unfortunately, as she sat down to have dinner with Jack, she suffered a massive heart attack. And Jack's dementia was so far advanced, he didn't recognize she needed any kind of emergency help. So by the time help arrived, it was too late. Peggy was gone. And Nicole, Peggy was my mother. I had to learn the hard way that we are not, as a society, dementia aware enough. Even though this happened many, many years ago, I have dedicated my life to helping communities and professionals and family caregivers understand a very different way to communicate and engage that will give them some relief, and also that deeper understanding of dementia so that they can understand what they can and cannot do on this journey, especially the fact that they cannot do this by themselves. They must build their village. They must ask for help. They must learn new ways and tips and strategies to help support that person who is suffering from really the most horrific illness of our time, and that is any cause of dementia symptoms.
And I'm so glad that you're here, and the story, it's so hard that that's what brought you to this time of sharing that information, but so impactful for others to be able to bring that passion and that mission to what you do. Thank you for sharing that. You do talk so much about how that caregiver stress and that burden weighs so deeply on a lot of us as family caregivers. There's a lot of disruption to schedules, to life, to, being thrown into unknown situations that we're not familiar with when we haven't been through it before. And you offer tools to bring people through that, and that good reminder that they're not alone. And one of the questions that you asked in the book to some of your caregivers and the audience was, who is the most important person? And can you share what responses do you get when you ask that question?
Well, one response comes to mind in particular because it was so moving and it touched my heart so much. But I was giving a presentation at a senior center, and several people were filing in, and I noticed, generally speaking, my presentations are really for the caregiver, not for that person who has these dementia symptoms, because this is a lot of painful information and that they have a lot of difficulty processing. So I like to have that time with the caregivers, but sometimes that's just not possible. So I noticed a couple came in, and I could see that he was the caregiver. He was leading his beautiful older wife into the room, and she looked so confused. There was so much stimulation going on that she was having difficulty. She just had that look on her face, and her sweater was buttoned uneven, and she was shuffling, and so there were a lot of challenges I could see. But they sat in the front row, and he was eager to learn, which I so admire these caregivers. They're my heroes. He sat there. He wanted to learn how to better support her in this journey. And I came to the point where I was talking about how impactful this is. And she didn't look like she was really paying attention that much. She didn't look real engaged, but she was sitting there quietly at that time. And I asked the audience, well, who do you think is the most important person in this whole relationship? And she looked up at me and she said, he is. She knew immediately that he was her lifeline. He was doing exactly what I teach. He was thinking for her and filling in those gaps from her loss of brain function, not just physically, not just emotionally, not just socially, but overall in all of her struggles and challenges as she walked through her dementia journey. And so they do recognize, we may not be able to see it, but their feelings and emotions remain, Nicole. And he made her feel loved, safe, secure, and valued. And that's all we can do. And what a wonderful person. What a hero. What a champion.
Yeah. And you do such a great job of sharing that message of the caregiver's importance and speaking to them about honoring that within themselves, because I think a lot of times, right, there's guilt involved. It's feeling selfish that we shouldn't, it's not about us, it's about the people we're caring for, and just shifting the perspective on the reminder that ultimately you have to take care of yourself and you have to put yourself first so that you can really care for others well. Wouldn't you say that that's so true, so important? I really glean that from how you wrote.
There's millions of Peggy's out there, whether they are the adult son or daughter, whether they're a neighbor, a friend, that spouse, that aunt, that uncle, that person who has stepped up to fill that role, to walk side by side with somebody who's going through this very painful and long and arduous journey. And the statistics are frightening, Nicole, because 68% of the time, over half the time, that caregiver, especially if it's a same age spouse, they get sick and go first. So that is why it is so necessary. I honestly feel in my heart, had I known that as Peggy's daughter, I'm a gerontologist. I've studied aging, and yet I did not recognize this impact. Had I known that and insisted that we got her some help, I possibly could have saved her life. And so I carry that guilt with me, and I share that all the time. The importance that you cannot be that selfless caregiver and sacrifice yourself, because then you won't be there to help them. That's why I want to be on your show to share this. There's just a few tweaks that we need to make to your life, and you can find that time to help yourself, to ask for help, to learn what kind of help that will actually give you what you need in support. You read my book, it takes 2 evenings, and maybe email me. We have a little short consult session, and we customize your care to give you that relief, that peace of mind, to give you some resources. It's out there. I just want to hold your hand and help you get there.
Thank you for that. People do need that. They want to know that they're not alone. I think that's the biggest overarching message that I am passionate about sharing also, is that we are in this with them and through all of the things. Part of another piece is, as a caregiver, when we take on that stress, that is really impacted with how we communicate to those with dementia and the loved ones in our lives, and how it can impact our interactions. Can you share with us more about that, and what type of communication that we need to look at when we're, adjusting to all of those emotions that we're feeling?
What happens with us as humans is every millisecond, our brain is hit with data that our brain has to process and make sense of. What we see, what we hear, how we move, how we think. And someone who has this loss of brain function is beginning to struggle with that every day. And if they have a progressive cause, such as Alzheimer's, they lose that ability, their brain's ability to actually think and process and find meaning and purpose in every piece of data that it receives. So our job as a caregiver is to recognize that as they lose that, they don't lose the emotions and feelings that they have. So if you're being hit with information you don't understand, it tends to make you feel anxious or annoyed or frustrated. And so what we need to do is learn to think for them. And there are communication tips and strategies that I teach that help that person to trust you, allow you to think for them, and keep them in feelings of safety, security, love, and value. So that's what we learn to become dementia aware, what I teach. That's how we learn to better engage and connect and have that proactive approach in our care that will give you relief, will give anyone who's helping you relief, and especially give that person who is in this dementia bubble, give them the opportunity to relax their brain and not be quite so anxious. So it's important that we take that time, so then we can have more time for ourselves. We also have to recognize that we have to think for them 24 hours a day. So we have to take time to think for ourselves to keep our brains healthy, and ask for that help, ask for that relief, so that we can provide that dementia aware safety net that is more overreaching.
That's such a good reminder. And we'll talk more about the what does it mean to be dementia aware. And if we're talking about emotions also, I love that you had stated that they're very perceptive of our emotions over our words. So it's really understanding that how we say things and our tone and the look on our face and all of that is so impactful in those interactions. And when we're stressed out, I'm sure what comes across is, you can't see my face, but that anger, that stress, or that fear as a caregiver, and that is related. And so just being really mindful of what is the perception that I'm giving that I'm not necessarily aware of, because we don't, in other interactions, have to think as much about that because our words do the speaking and the teaching for us.
Absolutely. And if I were to give this entire interview like this, blah, 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 you could hear me, right, Nicole? You could hear what I was saying, but it wouldn't have any meaning to you. So I think that would make you feel a little frustrated, maybe confused, maybe even annoyed, like, why am I interviewing this lady? She doesn't make any sense. So that's the kind of feeling that we're giving unintentionally when we're trying to speak and give verbal instruction or talk to somebody who can't process it, because often what they're hearing is blah, 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 because it doesn't, their brain is not able to make sense of it. So it just sounds like stuff. And so then that leaves them feeling very confused or almost put upon, like, what are you saying? And so it's all about how we make them feel with our approach. Maya Angelou has a beautiful quote. She says, people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. That is true with a healthy brain, because we still feel, we just are able to make sense of how we're feeling or how someone has made us feel. Sometimes that takes a little while. Sometimes someone will say something and we will hear something come from their mouth that doesn't make sense to us, might hurt our feelings, but we can think about it. We can process it. We can even talk to them about it. When you get that feeling and you can't make sense of it, then you're lost in the feeling. So the dementia aware version of that is people with dementia symptoms can't always process what you say, and people with dementia symptoms can't always process what you do, but what you do and say makes them feel. So be careful what you do and say, and how you do it and how you say it, because it's all about you guiding them to certain kinds of feelings that perhaps are more positive than what you might do if you just expected them to think about it.
Right. And caregivers ask the question, they want to know the right way to respond or care for someone that has dementia. And you use the term, the dementia elephant is mentioned. Can you explain that? Is there a right way?
In that old fable about the blind men that were trying to figure out what an elephant was by just touching the trunk or touching the elephant's leg or foot or the tail. They were trying to feel without being able to see, really just, they couldn't accommodate all of their senses to understand what's going on. That really is the world of someone who has dementia, because they are limited to how they can really understand what is happening in any given moment, what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And so what we have to understand is that there's many different perceptions, and everyone, including all of those blind men, had a different perception about what that elephant was. When we do dementia aware care strategies, when we have a loving approach, we have to understand that everybody presents dementia differently because they have different loss. And so our care approach has to be fluid and flexible and customized. There's no such thing as a good cookie cutter care approach. So it's learning to tweak it to your individual. It's learning as professionals, learning from family members, how that person reacts to certain stimuli, their loss and their abilities, and then really supporting that person's abilities and filling in for their loss. So it's about really having a more global yet specific and focused approach for each person. That's really dementia awareness.
I love how you use that term. It's that like almost light bulb that you've got. You talk about moving from dementia denial to dementia awareness. What happens when you shift from one to the other? If you could distill it down for us.
Of course. What I hear and see and observe and have real relationships with family members or professionals, when they recognize that that person has this broken thinker, when they understand that they are seeing the world in a very different way than we see it, but that their feelings and emotions remain real, no matter how different it is from how we feel in a situation, their feelings are very real, and we can't stop, fix, or change where they are. We must let go the oars in that rowboat. We have to let the current of dementia carry us all to the place where they need to be and just trust the process. So we can't stop them from feeling some way. We can't tell them they shouldn't feel that way. We have to join their feelings. And that is becoming dementia aware. And the magic that happens, I have many stories in my book of the magic that happens when that connection is made and we help that person have moments of meaning. I think the frustrating part for caregivers is that I'm saying moments. When you use this method, you will have magical moments of meaning where this is where you're really going to connect and have those gifts of purpose and value and peace of mind. But 15 minutes later, that person cannot retain that information if they have this kind of loss. So they go back, and we have to go back and do it again and again, because we're not stopping, fixing, or changing it. We're allowing it to be and managing it. And when they reach that point, there's this huge, heavy weight that is lifted off of them because they feel, oh, I don't have to fix this. Right. I can't fix it. It's just frustrating to everybody. I can just learn ways to just take this ride together and do the best I can and enjoy these moments of meaning.
That realization is so comforting, to know that we are not responsible for fixing and changing. That is a big weight to carry.
Absolutely. And it's going to get harder, but you're going to get better. It just kind of goes along. So the landscape changes, but you just get better at navigating the landscape. Yeah. So it helps so much with the stress because, you know, the stress is really compounded when we're so frustrated that we can't stop this from happening. We want to stop it, but that really is so stressful.
You also talk about a method, and people will have to read your book to really see those examples. I love how it's laid out by chapter of the lessons learned and the perceptions and approaches. It makes it really simple to gather all the information through example, to put yourself in those situations that we've probably experienced with the people that we care about. But one piece of it is you talk about the successful communication that comes from the affirmative response method. Tell us a little bit more about what that method is and how that works for people.
Sure. We have to recognize the affirmative response method is actually joining their feelings and not arguing with their feelings and thinking for them. So it's kind of a combination. So what I ask caregivers to start thinking about is how often they ask questions. And when we ask someone with a healthy brain questions, which we've learned to do in communication, we ask questions all the time because we stimulate that person's brain to bring us a response. So when I ask you a question like, how are you today, Nicole? I stimulate your brain to think of a response that's appropriate to that question. So I'm asking you to think. What happens when that person starts to lose the ability to process and think is it's aggravating for them to have to use that part of their brain. It's frightening and anxious, anxiety provoking. And so instead, what I ask in the affirmative response method, if you have a behavior that you're challenged with, perhaps that person is pacing, instead of asking, what do you need? Because they can't answer that. It just makes them more anxious, and they'll pace more. Instead, it's coming alongside them. And, I like to walk when I'm feeling anxious as well. I'm going to walk with you and be there with them and let them feel. And then you can use a distraction like a positive action statement. Let's walk over here and have our breakfast. I love it when we have breakfast together. Perhaps they were hungry and could not tell you that. Perhaps they were uncomfortable and needed to use the restroom. You can offer these options, but you don't want them to have to think of it. So it's really the affirmative response method is joining their feelings, positive action statements, no questions or options. Don't have them make a decision. Their decision maker is broken. It makes them anxious. And when you start to do that, they will trust you more and more. They just begin to rely on you and allow you in so that you can support them in this very special way. You will see them start to relax. Start to have more moments of meaning.
Within that framework of each chapter, there are so many great, valuable tools for people, the approaches with their loved ones. We have a lot of personal feelings and emotions as a caregiver of our own stuff, right? That comes out as we're doing this journey with our loved one. And while we don't have time to go into each one, I wish we could, but people know where to find your book. We'll share that with them. But some of those emotions that you talk about is that grief. And there's two sides of that grief. There's that anticipatory grief. There's that unfolding grief. How do you find that grief shows up and plays a role in that caregiving?
Of course, grief causes physical challenge as well. You've heard about how you just felt it in your gut. That grief is an extreme emotion that hits your body like a punch in the gut. And what happens with caregivers of someone who has dementia, this is a long road. They might need care anywhere from, on average, 2 to 20 years. It's kind of evens out in the middle, kind of about 10 years is what I hear most of the time from the time they start to really show these symptoms and need care. But all along that journey, you are grieving different kinds of loss of their ability to bake banana bread like they had all their life, loss of their ability to go and enjoy a restaurant because that's too overstimulating, loss of the ability to really sleep all night and have a really good night's sleep. And if it's your spouse to sleep next to you, that might have to change. All of those abilities, as you begin to lose them, you grieve them one at a time. And yet there are still glimmers of that person, depending on where they are on that road, that you enjoy. So you're back and forth all the time, grieving the loss, enjoying the moment, grieving the loss, challenged by a new loss. And so it is that. It's that anticipatory grief plus that unfolding grief. What am I gonna lose next? What's gonna happen next year? And the caregivers ask that question, and we have no answers. Everybody's different. And what did I just lose? And what did I lose last week? So it's this unfolding, constant grief, not acute grief, which also happens at the end of this road, but not that I can really process it. It's that, okay, I'm feeling this, but now I have to go on to this and this. That's why this is so difficult on those family members. That's why I beg them to ask for help from a group, a good dementia aware hospice group that can come in and help with these kinds of feelings and emotions and help them work through this. And with any cause of dementia, they can get hospice help earlier. I have a whole portion in the book about asking for it earlier than other kinds of terminal illnesses. So it's so important that we understand and get help for that grief as well.
Yes. Well, that might be a whole nother conversation we have about hospice. I know there's a lot of questions around that as well. And there shouldn't be as much fear because it can be such an amazing support system for people. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, I've seen it be magical on that end of the journey. And I'm talking about maybe a year-long end, because it's not always just that 6-month window when it comes to any cause of dementia symptoms. It's very different with that.
Yeah, it really is. One of the things you also talk about is those creative interventions. I think it's so true. We have to think outside of the box. Can you just give one small example of what that would look like as we're being creative and caring for our loved one?
Well, once again, it needs to be wrapped in that affirmative response, positive action statement. But if you have a loved one who is asking about their mom, where's mom? And perhaps it's your elderly spouse, and you know that years ago his mom passed away. What is he feeling? You have to join his feelings. He's missing his mother. He's feeling lonely, perhaps abandoned. But the worst thing we can do is give him the facts and figures, because what that's going to do is send him over the edge in his grief process that he can no longer manage. So we don't say, oh, she died years ago. What we do is we do what I call a creative intervention. We talk to the feelings. So what I found most successful is to talk to those actual feelings. Oh, your mom, I love your mom. She did such a great job raising you, and you two were so close. I love to hear the story about when you and mom took that road trip. And if you can get them in that feeling, what have you just done? You've brought them to that feeling, that memory that maybe they couldn't process or access, but that the feelings that were attached to that, you brought them to that feeling of love and joy, and that event was happy. And they feel that for the moment instead of feeling the loss. So you didn't lie to them. You didn't lie, and you didn't say, you can do a therapeutic lie, which will buy you some time perhaps. But what I like to do is dive into, get past that therapeutic lie and just dive into what's real to them, the feelings. So, oh, your mom, she's so beautiful. You can just talk about how they're feeling about mom rather than the event of where she is, because that's not important. It's about how they're feeling in the moment.
Yes, because some feeling for them was brought up, which is causing their wanting to see that person. What a great way to connect and dive into the feelings that are still really intact, and they're able to express that.
Absolutely. The feelings are the only thing that's real, not facts and figures about when she died or where she died or how she died. They can't process that anymore. They're just feeling only the emotions.
What a great way to share with people that are wondering what to do in those situations and have those questions, because that's wouldn't you say, a more common one? People are looking for people that they have loved and are wondering where they are, and being able to answer that in a way that can be therapeutic for both parties.
Well, Nicole, I know if I were to ask you, how does it make you feel when you think about times with your mom? What is the feeling that brings up, And so most of the time I have worked with people they're not good feelings, but we work through those too. Yeah. We let them feel, and we let them know that we're there, and that we are just with them, that we just join them in their feelings and allow them to feel.
Yeah. I just am so thankful that you are sharing this with people. I think it's so beneficial, so encouraging. As we end our conversation today, how can you encourage people to keep moving forward on this journey with their loved one?
Open your heart, allow people in. I'm here for you. There are many ways that you can reach me through my book, through my website. We'll give you all of that information. I do personal consultations that are very reasonable. I can do them on Zoom. I do them all over the country. And let me help you customize. Let me give you that kind of support. Let me give you resources of professionals and other organizations that can help you. Please, please ask for help. We're here for you. And the more we demand as dementia-aware individuals, dementia-aware support, the more we will have it. I just was energized because on the Today Show, they're talking about first responders, and I have a special first responder training to help raise dementia awareness. Your community, entire communities have raised their dementia awareness. Let's all hold hands and get through this together. That's what we need to do.
I agree. You're such a gift to all of us. Thank you, Laura, for your wisdom and your kind heart in sharing that with all of us. Thank you so much. And we'll include your website and information in our episode description so our listeners can scroll down and see all of your information and know where to connect with you.
And I'm happy to link you from my website so we can help raise dementia awareness. Go forth and raise dementia awareness, please.
Yes, we are in this together. We are. We are.
Thank you, Nicole. What a joy you are.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And now time for an ad break. So I have to tell you about my friend Jimmy Zolo and his new company, Joe and Bella. Our paths had crossed and I'm so glad that they did. Jimmy is passionate about older adults. He told me that after both of his grandparents moved into a care community, his family's world has turned upside down and they really became caregivers overnight. As you know, being a caregiver to someone close to you can be overwhelming and there's so much to manage, like making sure your loved one has all of the products they need, keeping things stocked when things run out. And Jimmy's family also had that same problem. They were scrolling through all of these product reviews online, unsure what would be the best to purchase. It can be really time consuming and frustrating, and he wished there was a simpler way to shop for his grandparents. Jimmy decided to launch his own business to solve this problem. He founded Joe and Bella to make shopping for older adults simple. They carry everything from comfy shoes to creative gifts, even toiletries that can automatically be reordered, and technology that makes caregiving easier. And what I love, and I know you guys will too, is that each and every product on Joe and Bella has been carefully selected by caregiving experts. Jimmy is giving an exclusive offer to listeners of this podcast. You can use promo code GATHER to receive 10% off your first purchase at joeandbella.com. That code is GATHER, GATHER, for 10% off at joeandbella.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.